All right. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Darren Ottenhoff. I am the Senior Specialist for Emergency Food Security with IDEAL. Before we start, we'd like everyone to be aware that we will be providing Arabic and French interpretation for this webinar. As you can see on the screen, please click on the interpretation globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select Arabic, English, or French. Once you've selected your preferred language, you can choose to mute the original audio, or you can hear it in the background at a lower volume. During the webinar, please ask your questions to the panelists in the Q&A box that is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also upvote questions asked by fellow participants. There will be a little time following the presentations to address some of these questions. Today's webinar will present the preliminary findings from CARE's VSLAiE in Emergencies pilot in Taiz, Yemen. The full report will be published and should be available next week. This report was made possible by a grant from IDEAL, the implementer-led design, evidence, analysis, and learning activity. To learn more about IDEAL's small grant program, you can visit the FSN network or click on the link that was just shared in the chat box. I would like to now welcome Natasha Bryce, Senior Technical Advisor for VSLAiE in Emergencies at CARE. Over to you, Natasha.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, thank you for joining us. My name is Natasha Bryce. I am the Senior Technical Advisor for VSLAiE in Emergencies at CARE. I am based in Atlanta. So today it's a pleasure to be sharing some of the work we've been doing over the past 2 years. And I have with me in the panel two colleagues of mine who've been on this journey with me for a very long time. Barak, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Natasha. So as Natasha has mentioned, I'm a colleague at CARE. My name is Barak Kinanga. I'm the Food Security and Livelihood Technical Advisor for the CARE Yemen programming. I'm based out of Sana'a. So we've been in this journey together with Natasha and the broader team, and we are still on that path together.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Barak. And I have with me Charlotte, who's been leading the research side of the VSLAiE in emergency.
Yeah, hi. Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Heels, and I'm CARE-UK's Head of Impact and Learning. And as Natasha said, we've been working for about a year now on the VSLAiE in emergencies research, which we'll be presenting today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the agenda today is that we have 3 presentations. The first one is going to be by me. I will take you through the journey of the in the beginning of the VSLAiE in emergency research, how the VSLAiE in emergency model was developed, and Barak has the second presentation. He will take you through how this model that was designed was implemented in Yemen. And he's going to be talking more from the country's perspective. And Charlotte will take you through the data, the learning at different stage of the VSLAiE in emergency model. So to start, I will do a quick introduction of the research, the data that we, how we collected the data so that we can design the VSLAiE in emergency. And Barak will take after that. So one might ask is himself or herself, why did CARE invested in the VSLAiE in emergency project? The reason why is, as you all know, CARE has been implementing VSLAiEs in development settings for a very long time. But we notice there has been significant challenges when it comes to establishing VSLAiEs in humanitarian settings, specifically crisis settings. So we decided that it would be a good idea to understand how can the saving and loan methodology be adapted in crisis affected settings, and so that we can use not only understand how the methodology can be adapted, but also understand how can we use this wonderful platform to provide as an entryway to provide to deliver humanitarian planning and response. So the end goal actually is to strengthen our humanitarian programming by designing a VSLAiE in emergency model that can be adapted in any context, and as well as that can be scaled. So next slide. In order to start the research, we did it's kind of like an assessment within CARE, which country offices that we have that has specific experience in implementing VSLAiE in emergencies, understanding their journeys, and also collecting information on their experiences. What are the challenges that they encountered when they tried to implement VSLAiEs in such settings? So we did about 14 KII interviews, key informant interviews in 7 country offices in CARE that has specific experience in VSLAiE in emergency, whether they implemented VSLAiE as a standalone project or they tried to connect or link VSLAiE with humanitarian programming. We also consulting more than about 125 CARE technical experts through 45 country offices. We held 3 different regional workshops documenting and the CARE's learning when it comes to VSLAiE in emergency. So we didn't just do documentation or consultation with CARE. We also held an industry-wide learning event with the support of the SIP network. I'm sure some of you guys knew the SIP network when we had the SIP, but bringing together 12 peer international organizations so that we can understand if any of them were thinking or even doing some work in VSLAiE in emergencies. Next. So through all the data collection that we did, here are some challenges that came out, and those challenges were constant throughout the different data collection activities we completed. When it comes to implementing VSLAiE in emergencies, the most challenged part is, the movement. Refugees and IDPs, they are highly mobile, so they move a lot. Sometimes they have difficulties to, if they are part of a group, they have difficulties to fully participate because they're always looking for better opportunities. And then the second most, difficulties and challenge was the remote monitoring, because when there's an active conflict, sometimes it's extremely difficult for team members to go to the field to monitor those activities. And another major one is difficulty to self-select. As we all know, the VSLAiE methodology thrive on self-selection. And because refugees and IDPs, sometimes they don't know the host communities very well, the social cohesion is not there yet. So that presents a major challenge for VSLAiE. And then the saving cycle. Most of the technical experts we consulted mentioned that the saving cycle is pretty long, 12 months. And those people also are vulnerable that to wait that long to have access to their money is a little bit difficult. And then when we asked them about what about when connecting VSLAiE or link VSLAiE with humanitarian programming, specifically cash and voucher assistance, the main challenge that came up was, VSLAiE is long-term, CVA is short-term, so connecting those two programs is a little bit hard, specifically when we know humanitarian is short-term. Most CVAs are 3 months, maybe 6 months long. So how to adapting those two programs so we can have the activities at the same time is a little, so that they can benefit from each of the activities a little bit hard. And then the second most, the ones that they mention a lot is, where do people find money to save? Refugees, actually no, that was the under the VSLAiE part. Refugees really don't have money to save. They don't have the ability to save. Sometimes when they do save, the saving is very small and it's not enough to create a major impact. So going back to the CVA linkages, the other thing is the perception of refugees. So when they perceive, if they can connect, you know, receiving cash means that for me to participate in VSLAiE means that I'm going to receive cash. People would sign up for VSLAiE for the wrong reasons, and that would negatively impact the sustainability of the group. And then the sequencing of project activities. Implementers find it pretty hard to sequence those activities, and because sometimes they're not sequenced very well, that also has negative impact on the VSLAiE that they created. And the most major one that actually was a little bit hard to take in is the lack of coordination, lack of communication among CVA staff members and VSLAiE staff members. Because the coordination is not done well, it's hard to really create the linkages between CVA and VSLAiE. Next. But what we learned though is VSLAiE it's possible to implement VSLAiE in very, conflict affected settings, crisis settings. It is possible because VSLAiE is very flexible, and we have to preserve the flexibility of VSLAiE. But in order for people to invest or to implement VSLAiE, we realize that you have to have strong capacity in VSLAiE in country, because what we saw that the country offices that were able to do those adaptations to the VSLAiE to be able to work were those that have strong capacity in VSLAiE. So we have to ensure that in country we do have the capacity. And then when it comes to the linkages of VSLAiE and CVA, we realize that it is possible, but it has to be done at the programmatic level, not at the beneficiary level. And then lastly, harmonize the humanitarian donor requirement with VSLAiE methodology. What we mean by that is, of course, humanitarian donors sometimes they are not on board to finance or to accept that we include VSLAiE in humanitarian budget or proposals, because they see it as a development product. So we have to take that, the adaptation and the development product and that adapt it to the humanitarian settings and convince the donors that this can work. Next. So based on the challenges and everything that I shared with you, we decided to create, and we realized that it's not so much as creating a VSLAiE in emergency model, but it's more because VSLAiE works the way it is, it works in any context. So why change something that's already working? So we realized that we have to design an approach to the VSLAiE in emergency. And that approach is really, it's making it stronger and strengthen the ability to implement VSLAiE or to integrate VSLAiE in humanitarian programming. The first step is preparedness. We all know, for those of us who's implemented emergency programming, preparedness is key. The more prepared you are, the easier, and it would facilitate implementation. And in this VSLAiE approach, the first step, preparedness, is key. Unfortunately, is the step that's most neglected by implementers. but that would facilitate the rest of the 2 steps. What we see in it is, you know, capacity building, make sure you have programmatic tools, your partnership with local organization is vetted and they are assessed. We'll go into more detail into that later on. The second step, we see that VSLAiE can be linked to CVA in 2 major steps. The first one is how do we create new groups through CVA programming. What I mean by that is targeting cash and voucher assistance beneficiaries to create VSLAiE groups. And then the second way we can link CVA and VSLAiE is by using existing VSLAiE platform for the country offices that already have VSLAiEs well established to inform the design of your humanitarian programming. And the last step is, you know, use and shorten the cycle. The VSLAiE cycle, as we know it, as 12 months. Most people that we interviewed thought it was too long. For that context, maybe we can try a 9 to 12 month cycle, but know your context. It depends on your context. Next step, slide. So we're gonna go into each quickly, but remember, we can share that information. We've done detailed assessment, detailed work. We have everything detailed out. We can share that later on with everyone. But when it comes to remember the issue of lack of coordination, short-term versus long-term programming, sequencing of activities. I think in the preparedness phase, we can address all of that because those are issues that if you don't address them in the beginning, before you even have a project or a proposal, you're not going to be able to implement VSLAiEs as swiftly, as effectively that you could if you didn't take care of all that. We think you start by capacity building in the preparedness phase. Remember, that phase is looking for a champion because if not, that's the phase that you do. It doesn't cost much, it doesn't take much resources, but it requires discipline to take care of that. So, capacity building, programmatic tools, that's what you do in that phase. Next step. And then when you link, remember the issues about refugees not being able to save, the sequencing of activities. When you do all that work in your preparedness phase, you are able to link when it's time to implement, you are able to systematically collaborate with your team because you guys worked through it before. You've already established your targeting strategy, so it's easier to implement, to do as you said when you did the preparedness phase. You determine the right sequencing of activities so that VSLAiE doesn't negatively impact CVA, CVA doesn't negatively impact VSLAiEs. Next. And then in line of still, connecting CVA and VSLAiEs, we think that putting those existing groups, putting women at the center of the humanitarian programming, by connecting with them, by having them give you informed your program design, what the selection of delivery mechanism, is it voucher, mobile cash? They will let you know what's the best way to distribute, determine the value of your transfer, the duration, the delivery place, is it safe, is it accessible? So it's good to get those existing VSLAiEs involved in the design early on as well. Next. And then when we said the flexible cycle, we've had some implementers that even talked about 6 months, but we also find there are some challenges with the 6 month saving cycle. It's too short. the social cohesion really is not what we are looking to build, and the strengthening of the social cohesion is not happening. So we recommend to kind of keep the cycle to 9 to 12 months. But the cycle should include, at all time, for it to be successful, you have to include adapted training mechanism. You have to be present at every meeting and be responsive. You really, and then also we have to include in our budgeting enough money or time to continue to delay graduation. What I mean by delay graduation is the first cycle, you are present, you are training them, you are giving them all the resources that they need. But you also need to be present for the second cycle, because remember the situation that the people are living, they are very vulnerable and they need the additional support. The second cycle, I'm not asking for you to be present as you were in the first one, but it's good to keep monitoring those groups and keep supporting those groups going into the second cycle. Next. What you're gonna hear now is Barack was gonna talk about Yemen, but we have more pilots going on. Yemen was the first one. Yemen ended earlier than the other ones. Not earlier, but you know, they started earlier, so we have the data to share with you guys now. But we do have Syria going on. We have Jordan. We also just started with Colombia and Ecuador, and with the support of, you know, BHA, IDEAL, and you know, the SALL Foundation the SALL Family Foundation. We are able to do those pilots and collect data to share with you all. But for now, I'm gonna let Barack go through the same, you know, the same process, the same VSLAiE that are designed for Yemen to implement, and he'll share the learning and the experience from the country office with you. Barack?
Thank you very much, Natasha. So I would be presenting to you what we've actually done in practical terms here in Yemen, so that you can see the application of the first initial research that we did, and now we are applying it. So next slide, please. So basically, I just want to give you an overview of what Yemen is. Until most recently, it has been one of the worst humanitarian crises, and we are not yet out of the woods, only that we have another situation in Ukraine. But still, you can see from the statistics here, 82%, which of course is close to 29 million of the population need humanitarian support. There are different needs in this particular country, but for this one, we are going to basically focus on the issue of financial access. And there is currently no a sustainable source of financial access to both women and men of Yemen. Next slide. So how do we find ourselves in this situation of VSLAiE in emergencies? I know most of the participants here, you are very familiar with the traditional model of VSLAiE that is implemented in other parts of the world. And in 2017, we started that, we piloted it here in Yemen. But somewhere in 2019, we had to just stop through a failing forward process of learning, and we said, we were encountering problems along the way using the traditional model. So in 2019, we had to pause a little bit and reflect whether there would be some adjustments taking place. So it's at that moment that the idea of VSLAiE in emergencies came into existence, and then from 2019 to date, we've been able to actually form up to 120 VSLAiE groups across different governorates in Yemen. Let's move forward, please. Now, I specifically want to present to you this pilot project. We have other VSLAiE projects within Yemen taking the same model, but this one was very specific because there were learnings that we extracted from this. We implemented this one in Taiz. Taiz is a governorate in Yemen, western Yemen. In 2021, for over 10 months, we targeted 300 women who are in the context of acute food and livelihood crisis with huge economic instability. So out of these 300 women groups, we formed 16 VSLAiE in emergencies alongside the CVAs. And just after the closure of that program, we had other people in the community replicating this model of VSLAiE. Next slide. So, what adaptations did we have to put into this pilot project? Just like my colleague Natasha has mentioned, there is the adaptation of preserving the flexible nature of VSLAiE by allowing the methodology to work. You see, it's important for us to note that VSLAiE in emergencies is not reinventing the pillars of VSLAiE. They remain the same. The concept of saving, the concept of loan, the concept of social, insurances and loans, that remains. So we preserve the flexible nature of VSLAiE, and then the other adaptation that we had to put into place is how we would systematically link the VSLAiEs and cash and voucher assistance programming. VSLAiE is about money, so people need to have sources of income, and that's why we linked our VSLAiE program with the CVA programming. Then, what other adaptations did we provide? We provided adaptations like offering business skill. This is the plus. In the traditional VSLAiE, this component of training is not there, but we included it in this particular one in VSLAiE in emergencies. Then we also provided a platform for conflict and peace building. And depending on your VSLAiE groups, you can include other things like climate smart agriculture if there are VSLAiEs formed to support farmers. You can always bring any component of interest here. Then, as my colleague Natasha said, it is important to have the right talent, the right skill set. So we've continued to provide a robust in-country VSLAiE capacity building, both to our staff, the village agents, and the other stakeholders who are interested. And then lastly, the adaptation that we made is promoting savings with specific goals, objectives. Of course, savings in most instances is thought to help in asset creation, but in VSLAiE in emergencies, savings can as well be used for consumption smoothing. People can save when they have more, and they can use it during times of shock. Thank you. Next slide. So, what achievements and key learnings have we extracted from this pilot project? Number one, the impossible is possible. I mean, despite the VSLAiE being a new concept in Yemen, the concept is getting wide acceptance. You could see from a 10-month project, we had additional 22 groups forming, self-forming. You see now that one is a good adaptation and replicability. And then VSLAiE programming alongside humanitarian programming through sustained cash transfers can also be a potent vehicle in building community resilience. It doesn't necessarily limit you to cash transfers, but if there are other emergency livelihood interventions that are within the community, still those ones can also spur community resilience. Then Introducing VSLAiE in Yemen has given us an opportunity to learn about VSLAiE in emergencies. And lastly, VSLAiE are giving women economic opportunities and business skills, providing opportunities to incorporate gender equality in their homes and communities, even during the transient times of crisis. We've seen this with the groups where women have learned business skills and now they are investing into other livelihood options. Next slide, please. So here I will outline to you what we learned. The key learning number one, preserving the flexible nature of VSLAiE. One, the saving culture should be promoted and encouraged to build resilience. VSLAiE in emergencies offers financial access services, which are often not available in emergency context. You see, there has been the argument that when people are in emergencies, probably they are very like in a hopeless situation, but we noted that these financial services could be key. Still, people in emergencies need the same services like the other contexts. And then the other important thing is about targeting. There should be a very careful consideration during targeting. The VSLAiE services should not just be made available, rather they should be made available and anyone can be targeted. There are no special groups. The only issue is that it will not be necessary. I mean, it's not good at all contexts. There are certain contexts, like it is not good to target people in IPC phase 5, but with common sense, probably you can target IPC phase 4, phase 3, phase 1, phase 2 within an emergency context. And then cultural sensitivity is also another important thing for those who are working in contexts with Islamic beliefs on the issues of interest. Then the principle of VSLAiE require that community members mobilize their own resources for saving. But we noted that in emergency setting, they need kind of a small booster. So depending on your context, you can decide to provide what in cash transfer program we call cash plus. You may give them something to spur them because of the vulnerability in their context. Then lastly, the other thing we learned on preserving flexible nature of VSLAiE is we need to think about what happens when people move, what they will need to build resilience. For example, you may think of at the end of their VSLAiE saving cycles to provide grants to boost them. Next slide, please. So what else did we learn? There's the issue of ensuring a robust in-country capacity. I think this, my colleague Natasha spoke deeply about it, that without good skill set, the VSLAiE in emergencies may not work very well. You need staff who understand the VSLAiE concept very clearly. So then what you need to do is to train, have good staff with good skills in place. Another thing that we learned is the linkage of VSLAiE at the programmatic and the beneficiary level. I think this is where most of you who are going to try this model need to get a bit of a deep understanding. There is the programmatic part and there is the beneficiary level. The programmatic part is where you introduce the VSLAiE in emergency concept within the community, and the people themselves decide to whether get involved with VSLAiE or not. So the key point is the program part. Maybe it's not appropriate to take the VSLAiE at the beneficiary level point. Only introduce it at the program, let the people choose. And this is where the component of self-selection comes in. And we need to preserve that particular pillar of VSLAiE. So we don't say we are going to select people because it is a VSLAiE in emergency. No, people should just do self-selection. People should make choices to participate in this VSLAiE programming. Next slide, please. Then there is the learning number 4, which is harmonize humanitarian donor requirements with VSLAiE in emergency methodology. We know that while infusing VSLAiE with ongoing humanitarian program is a cost-effective way, standalone VSLAiEs have higher chances of being more successful. And this is because they run beyond the short cycles of other standard humanitarian programming. So this is an area that we need to do advocacy and present to donors to understand that we may need slightly longer time implementing VSLAiE in emergencies because of the nature of the savings and loan share out, and also establishing livelihood activities. We know that not all donors appreciate the VSLAiE in emergencies, but I believe from now onwards they will start appreciating, because already there is this pilot and there is a research supporting VSLAiE in emergencies as being something possible. Then a very key learning number 5 is around sustainability. When we design our proposals, we are always talking about sustainability. Now there is an element about VSLAiE in emergencies whereby it is not in itself a financial sustainability, but rather a service to enable pathways to sustainability. For example, services like business, life skill training, skill training should be offered alongside VSLAiE in emergencies for it to be sustainable. Then support with business grants where investment costs are low should also be considered. And we need also, where possible, to have community livelihood assets supported as enablers to these groups. The community livelihood assets could be like business centers, could be market spaces, and all this to enable these VSLAiE members to spur and move forward. Next slide, please. Yes, now I have to stop here and hand over to my colleague Charlotte to take you through the technical findings on the research that was conducted upon this project. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Barak. I'm going to try and move through some of these early slides relatively quickly. So, I mean, as Barak has already said, you know, this is a context of acute food and livelihood crisis, and what that really means is that you have, you know, quite high levels of people who have very, very poor levels of food security. 38% of people under the food consumption score were at 38% poor levels of food security, and 39% of households had to rely on negative coping strategies like selling assets. 98% of people had no savings at all, and 58% of people had to borrow from others in the preceding month. So in terms of what we did, we implemented a 10-month cycle, as Barak mentioned, and that included 10 cycles of unconditional cash transfer, which was approximately $632 US. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we saw in Yemen was that we were able to establish functional VSLAiEs, and this in a place where, as has already been mentioned, we had struggled to do that previously. On average, members of the VSLAiE in emergencies groups saved about 34% of their cash transfer, which was frankly surprising to us that people were able to save quite so much of their distributions. All respondents at the end of the project had savings, and that's after only 3% in the beginning. 48% of people set up small business activities or engaged in small business activities with that money. And one of the really interesting findings was that also people began distributing some of that money to the broader community, which we'll come on to a little bit in a bit. You'll also notice that we have some initial findings here from Syria and Jordan. Those are much earlier pilots, and we are equally finding there that we are able to establish fully functioning VSLAiEs, which have savings, lending, and social fund components. Next slide, please. So in terms of the kind of primary finding for us, it is that there is demand for these services. We were able to set up fully functioning VSLAiEs, but not without some level of hesitation. In communities where there has not been a lot of saving, it has not been possible, it is sometimes necessary to work with those group members in order to help them with financial literacy training, but also with just general support on why VSLAiEs could be valuable to them. And what we found was that actually VSLAiE members became really advocates for VSLAiEs in general. And as Barak mentioned earlier, we saw community replication. So we had groups who had received VSLAiE and cash transfer, and we actually had additional groups who did not receive cash transfer, but who wanted to set up VSLAiE and who felt that this would be valuable to them. From the perspective of care, there are sort of broader questions for us, which we're going to be examining in future research around the sustainability of those outcomes. So in particular, going forward, we're going to be monitoring those groups and thinking about questions about how do people draw down on those savings after the end of cash transfers, and how does that kind of impact longer resilience. Next slide, please. So as you've already heard, CVA and VSLAiE can work together really well, but they should be kept operationally separate. So from the beneficiary perspective, they should be considered separate because there are risks associated with the integration of VSLAiE and CVA. In particular, it's really important to make sure that best practice on both VSLAiE and particularly CVA is maintained in order to ensure that we are safely providing CVA to communities. In terms of the kind of model that we have developed, one of the first things that we found to be really important is to ensure that field teams and technical staff have really good in-depth knowledge and buy-in of why VSLAiE and CVA could be useful together. And then making sure that those staff members are coordinating their responses. Because one of the major things is we have to try and ensure that people do not associate becoming a member of a VSLAiE with getting CVA or vice versa. It's really important to make sure that the perception is that they are not contingent upon one another. And then we would go through a standard kind of CVA targeting approach, and then sensitization. So again, sensitization should take of the VSLAiE methodology should be undertaken with communities where some people may be receiving CVA and some people not. Again, making sure that those are distinct from one another is really important. And then we would invite people to form VSLAiE groups. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the kind of surprises for us, I think, was how quickly groups in Yemen moved towards wanting to take out business loans. There was originally some reticence about giving out larger loans because in the early phase of the project, a lot of the loans were focused on consumption smoothing. As we saw, a high proportion of people had been borrowing from friends and family in the preceding month. And so a lot of people wanted to use the savings that they had to stabilize their consumption. But what we actually heard from the community themselves was that they did want to do business activities. And they actually asked us to institute business training, which we were able to do. And we saw quite a significant shift in the purpose of lending from consumption smoothing in the early phase of the project towards investment in businesses. Our ability to respond to that, I think, was a sorry, was an important component of developing trust. Sorry, thank you. In terms of further work, I think we'll be looking to understand through multi-year programming what the sequencing of CVA, VSLAiE and business skills training might potentially do in terms of a transition from livelihood protection to livelihood promotion. Next slide, please. So in terms of how to operationalize, flexibility really is the word, and you've heard it a number of times already today. It's important to try and meet community members where they are. You can't rush people. They will get to the stage they need to get at in their own time. Shortened cycles can absolutely work, but they really require preparedness. You need well-trained staff, you need SOPs, and you need to have templates and tools available that people can build on quickly. You also need a very high level of interaction between field staff and the communities themselves, so that you're able to quickly respond to their needs as they arise. And one big component for us within this particular project was flexibility in budget and taking adaptive management approaches. So having a degree of flexibility within our budgeting processes meant that we could assign additional resources to things that the community themselves had identified as important. And that level of flexibility was really well received by the community themselves and was important for building trust, and not just trust in care, but also trust in the VSLAiE process. Next slide, please. And then this was a particularly interesting finding from our perspective, and really resonates with work that was done by REAL and Mercy Corps in Taiz quite recently. They found that in Yemen, understandably, which has been living through a protracted crisis, social solidarity and sharing culture is very, very profound. People share resources, and unfortunately, because of protracted crisis, some of the ability for communities to absorb that is being decreased. It's less possible for people to be able to do that for one another. Now, what we actually found was that the social fund in this particular context, which ordinarily within VSLAiE is designed in order to provide grants to members, was actually being repurposed. It was being used by the group in order to share responsibility for helping others in a way that put less burden on individuals, but ultimately meant that community needs could be served. So distributions were included, which paid for support to orphans, to people who had been imprisoned, for costs of cesarean sections. And for us, I think it's a really interesting finding to see how the inherent flexibility of a VSLAiE, the fact that VSLAiEs they're not cares, they belong to the groups themselves. Group members are able to purpose them in ways that serve their own needs and serve their own interests. And actually, the degree to which that has been vital within a crisis-affected context has been profound. Next slide, please. So going forward from a kind of research agenda perspective, we're going to be doing further study in new contexts, as Natasha mentioned. But we're also going to be looking to include VSLAiE and emergencies in longer term humanitarian projects to better understand the kind of progression from livelihood protection to livelihood provision and promotion. And then finally, we're going to be looking to kind of build out a toolbox for VSLAiE. And I will actually hand back to Natasha on that one to give some more detail on that.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hope you feel better. Drink a little bit of water. Yes, so we are working on designing a VSLAiE toolbox based on the experience we are in the learning from the different pilots that we are implementing. We are studying from Yemen, and then we have some great learning coming from Syria. And as Charlotte mentioned, that would give us opportunity to support, to help implementers be ready to implement VSLAiE in emergency settings. I've seen some I've seen a question about, so VSLAiE in emergency is just providing cash to VSLAiE groups, but no, but what we are saying is VSLAiE in emergency is the standard saving and loan methodology that you all are used to, but we are including components to it to be able to implement, to facilitate implementing or embedding VSLAiE in humanitarian programming. And we will have, as Charlotte mentioned, we will do some new research, because remember, this is a 10-month pilot. So we thought that those great learnings that we are getting, it's worth sharing with you all. But we do have more learning, more assessments coming up. I've seen question about, do we have comparative data to compare those that have received cash and the ones that have not received cash? That's coming up as well in the study that we will be doing. But a lot of what we've shared with you is we are asking you to consider and think through. Like I said, it's a working process. There's gonna be more data coming up in Syria, Jordan, and the other country offices that we are working with.
Natasha,
go ahead.
A question that is a little bit interesting, and I tried to answer it. Somebody asked if you link VSLAiE in emergencies to CVAs, and the cash value that is issued in the CVAs is pegged against a minimum expenditure basket or minimum food basket. Where do people get the money to do the saving? I want to answer this question this way, that nobody, even amongst ourselves here, who will think of saving when they have pressing needs. The women were not compelled to save. It was not like we give you the CVAs so you can save. But after a careful training and explaining to them the importance of saving, and only mentioning to them you can save what you cannot use at this moment, then the women embraced the idea of saving. So what we are trying to say is that you cannot do VSLAiE in emergencies targeting people in IPC phase 5, because those are experiencing famine-like conditions. But you can target people in IPC phase 3, in IPC phase 4, if they want to do the saving. And another myth I want to bust about people in emergencies, always these communities have different forms of resilience. Most of them are from rural households, and they could be doing a bit of little farming, but they only need something to boost them. So for instance, when you give them CVA assistance, probably along the way their crop is also growing, and when that matures, they already have a reprieve from the CVAs. And we all know that you don't just eat everything that you have. So this is one of the myth that was there before, that people in emergencies don't have anything, so they cannot save. But this particular project is demonstrating that these people lacked the services where to save. And the end result is they will still save this money and they will use it for consumption, not necessarily in investment into businesses, but for consumption smoothing when the CVA support has come to an end. Thank you.
For the panelists, I've been tracking questions, so I'm going to throw 2 out there that I'm hoping you can answer in 4 minutes. So first, there's a question about, in your pilot locations, was the government's prevailing budgetary and policy stance favorable? So I'm guessing the question is, how did you get buy-in at a local level? And second, did you see an opportunity to link groups to formal financial services as their portfolios increase over time?
Okay, I will take the question number 1. Currently, the functionality of government services in Yemen is almost like 0, because you see the country is in conflict and the policies are not fully functional. However, the VSLAiE is a a very, very cost-effective approach of financial access. It is owned by the people. It is not owned by any system. It's not owned by the government, it's not, but the people themselves come together. And in these communities, they've had their own traditional saving schemes called the Hakiba. So VSLAiE only comes in to bring a bit of sanity, a bit of, standards like constitution. It opens up for other community members to participate in it. So the authorities did not have a problem because they did not see VSLAiE in emergencies as a threat. In terms of, did we see an opportunity to link the groups to formal financial services? Yes, we saw there was an opportunity, but as it is right now, the microfinance institutions in Yemen are not very, very functional. So this particular component of linking these women with the other financial service providers is still an ongoing process. And that is why VSLAiE in emergency will still remain a huge platform to offer financial access services within the community. Thank you.
I want to add something quickly. First is, when it comes to the question about CVA, I strongly encourage anybody, any implementers who's implementing a CVA programming that is unconditional cash programming that's longer than 3 months, to really think about those integrations, because it works. I know that what we've seen from the research also, the first couple months of CVA is usually invested in consumption and immediate needs. It takes about the second to the third disbursement for people to truly understand, oh, I can do more with this money. I can actually save a little bit of this money. And this is where the special training, that's where you start seeing the saving increase. When you start providing special training on skills and trade, you'll start seeing more people are taking loans, more people understanding that they can use the money to do loans. So it is a process. It's not just as I know we know how to implement VSLAiE in development settings. We just, it becomes natural now. But with the VSLAiE in emergency settings, like I said, it's an approach. You know, you really have to take time to understand how you're gonna go about it. Your team has to be communicating to each other. You have to have tools. You have to come up with special training, and you have to really listen to your communities and how you can provide what they need. Also, flexible budgeting is also extremely good in that situation. So CVA, it's like I said, it's really try to see how you can link the programming when you're implementing CVAs that's more than 3 to 6 months.
This was great. Thank you, Natasha, Charlotte, and Barak. This has been very helpful and very interesting. We'd like to remind everyone that the presentation, as well as recordings from today's presentations, will be shared with all the registrants. We will also be sharing the full report as soon as it is officially published. We're hoping by the end of next week. So please be on the lookout for these and keep looking at your FSN network newsletters to see more of these events. This concludes today's webinar. So once again, thank you all and have a great rest of